Welcome to the Dude-Eronomy podcast, providing a male-centered, biblical, and relatable conversation about theology, thoughts, opinions on either topical or current events. Now, let's get into it. Welcome to another episode of the Dude-Eronomy podcast. This is an emergency broadcast. We are going to kick this out as soon as possible. My name is Kurt.
I'm Andrew.
And yesterday was July 13th, 2024. I mean, a really dark day in our history. It could have been so much worse, but yesterday, former President Trump was shot in the ear. The shooter was engaged immediately and killed by counter snipers on the Secret Service detail. There are lots of questions. One member in the audience did die. He was there protecting his wife and child, I believe, who were also in the audience. So it's really sad. The reason we wanted to do this podcast is twofold. One, we talked last week about American politics, and two, it's so topical because everyone in the country is talking about this. There's lots of information floating around. The first 12 to 48 hours after something like this happens, a lot of information you should take with a huge grain of salt because it's largely inaccurate. I saw lots of stuff that proved out to be completely not true. So there's a real heaviness, I feel like, in the air. We briefly touched on it and prayed about it at church today, Sunday the 14th, and it's just been a really weird last 24 hours. Andrew, how did you hear about it? What has been going through your mind?
My mother texted me, but I fairly on Twitter fairly often, so I saw things kind of developing, and then you texted me, and so I was texting and trying to inform my family and gather as much as possible. I was trying to have lunch with my wife, and I was constantly on Twitter. She's like, what have you found out now? What have you found out now? Things are just developing. So, I mean, really avoided a disaster. I mean, it was already a disaster from a lot of different perspectives, whether you look at it from security or other perspectives. I wonder if I could pose this question to you. I mean, we're going to talk about how, the world's processing this, especially America, but where do you think the conversation would go if he had been successfully assassinated?
Well, let me tell you just real quick I'll answer your question, but to tell people where the conversation did go yesterday, I was glued to Twitter, and one of the things that was trending was one job, and it was people on the left that were saying, this idiot only had one job, or just missed was also trending, I believe. And so that tells you sort of the state of our politics, of where it went when he almost did die. Now, look, I'm not going to say that the right is completely devoid of rhetoric, but the left has for quite some time been very vitriolic towards Trump. We talked about that last week. And look, again, the people on the right do this also. They talk about we need to fight and this is a war. And again, Trump does it too. So that he's not immune from this criticism. But just a few days ago, Joe Biden said we need to put Donald Trump in the crosshairs. What he was referring to was saying that I had a really bad debate. People are still talking about that, and his campaign want to change the subject. They want to say, hey, look, it was a bad night. We're moving forward. And a lot of people are talking about, should he step out of the race? He's like, no, we need to stop looking at me. We need to look at Trump because he's X, Y, and Z. And he said, we need to put Trump in the crosshairs. And that is, again, something that both sides do. So I'm not saying that it's Joe Biden's fault for doing this. It's just something that has become commonplace in our lexicon, probably back to the time of Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton. Have we,
if they dueled. That was the reference right there. They dueled.
They had a duel back in the 1800s. It's really sad that this happened. Obviously, the shooter is a 20-year-old essentially kid who, had to do high school and stuff through COVID, was
Right.
bullied and picked on a lot. So there's an underlying current of that in how we treat other humans that has a Christian response, of course. There's
Right.
so many threads to this. So your question, if he were assassinated, what would, I don't know. And it's a lot different because in 1963, John F. Kennedy was assassinated,
Hmm.
and he was not on live TV. TV wasn't as ubiquitous. This was being live streamed around the world, and
Right.
anyone could have seen it. After I heard that it had happened, I went back to the live moment, and then they cut away back to the news anchor, and she was like, "We're not really sure what's going on." So everyone was confused. But again, this was happening in live time, and we were two, maybe 1 inch away from seeing a
Yeah.
former president and a current presidential candidate for one of the two big political parties in our country having his head blown off on live TV.
Right. Yeah.
That's insane.
The trauma that would have come for that. Yeah, we really were inches from disaster. And I mean, you and I are both, we both have experience with guns. I mean, it was only 130 yards away. Somehow there's a lapse in security. It wasn't even inside the whole security sphere of the police and the Secret Service. So it was just outside. But I mean, it's pretty wild to me that someone can get on top of pretty much the only other vantage point looking at the area from the top down, which I'm sure you've seen pictures of.
Hmm.
Yeah, just this guy, 20-year-old, still developing his frontal cortex. 20-year-old, you said he was bullied. I guess something we should say, this is being recorded. You did say it was on Sunday. By the time you edit this and get it out, I don't know when it'll be. But I mean, I know Biden's going to be speaking tonight at 8 p.m. from the White House on the incident.
Oh, interesting, because I've seen him speak twice now. He spoke yesterday, then he spoke
Yeah.
this afternoon, and
I
then
think,
I guess
yeah,
he's making a national address, because usually presidents will sit in the Oval Office and they'll do like a an address,
right.
like just them talking to the camera. And I thought maybe that's what it was. He had Kamala there, and Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, and Mayorkas, the Department of Homeland Security head. They were in the Oval Office, but maybe, okay, so he's going to address the nation tonight. I hadn't heard that.
I believe so. Yeah, I think it was on one of the websites I was looking at, 8 p.m. Eastern. So we'll see what comes of that. I guess when I'm thinking about what's coming, his speech, I do hope this is a realization that words matter and how we describe our opponents matter, and they don't just stay as verbal pieces of audio that come out of our mouth. They develop into thoughts. They change minds. And when you think about the rhetoric that our political parties have called each other for the last, for a long time, but it seems in in the last 10, 20 years has accelerated to calling people Hitler and to saying that they're a threat to democracy. If someone with mental illness hears those things, what do you think the next step is? Is they have access to things and they're going to take action.
That's a part that when you talked about what our rhetoric has done, and we'll do this sort of role play experiment. If you had a chance to shoot Hitler in the 1930s, would you have taken it? I would say that most people's answer is yes.
Right.
You're going to take out Hitler. So for the last 8 years plus, people have been calling him Hitler. So if you take it to its logical conclusion, people are going to listen to you. And if people
Mm-hmm.
listen to you and they say like, holy, like this is who this guy is, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that like someone is going to internalize that and say, oh my gosh, he's that big of a threat. So the people that have been like the New Republic on the front of their magazine
Mm-hmm.
has Trump in a Hitler stash and other things. And actually, a city council candidate for Hillsborough posted something Friday, posted Trump as Hitler. And it's just, I saw someone commented that like they were spitting on the graves of 6 million Jews, which and
Mm,
that was from a Jewish organization that was posting that. So I
right.
don't feel out of turn saying that. It's just so disgusting how the level that they're that they're putting Trump at with Hitler. As far as I know, Trump hasn't done anything remotely close to the atrocities that happened during World War II.
Correct. He has not. Now, we're Kurt and I aren't saying that he isn't without fault. We've talked critically about him before on this podcast, and we both have a fair doubt that he is an authentic, follower of Christ. But as you were talking about that, I was thinking and processing how I would have viewed this years ago because I came out of a state of really political idolatry. And I think I wouldn't have had a Christian response, 10 years ago. I think if I would have seen my political opponent almost get taken out, it would have probably led me to almost rejoice. I realized that how disgusting I had gotten in my perspectives of things and that it wasn't Christian response and that Christ followers are meant to be peacemakers and that we should be seeing other people made in the image of God. And I was just really reacting about that and thinking through where I've come through on the other side of the gospel, like enlightening my life. And that's the hope that we can put forth, to this world and to this nation, that the gospel still brings light where there's darkness.
President Biden yesterday said praying for him. Well, first it took a little while for him to put out any
I
sort
saw
of
that.
statement. Then there was a statement. Then he came out and spoke for a couple minutes and said that essentially he's pausing his campaign. So they were trying to take down TV buys and TV ads that they were supposed to be running. They were trying to do that. He went from somewhere where he was campaigning back to the White House. So they essentially suspended the campaign. Investigation going on. Originally,
Right.
it was the Secret Service that was doing the investigation, but the FBI took that over yesterday because a lot of people have been critical about the Secret Service because they feel like there was a lot of things that were missed and a
Yeah.
lot of people that were not doing the things that they were supposed to be doing. And there's
Right.
also talk about, did Trump, has his campaign requested more security and was that denied? There's a question about that. One thing you talked about, we have some familiarity with guns. Yeah, that shot at 130, 150 yards is not very far, but
No.
the thing that has stunned me is that first off, we're talking about the rhetoric. The rhetoric that again this shooter has heard, he's 20 years old. And for
Sure.
half of his life, he's been hearing about this demon named Donald Trump, and he's going to destroy the country. And oh my gosh, he's coming to my backyard. He's going to be right here. But the second part is that the one thing that you can't practice for, like you can practice that shot at a decent sized range, but the thing you can't account for is the adrenaline dump that
Yeah.
that hits you when you're up there. Now, the other interesting point that came out today, this afternoon, is that there's so many facets to this story. It's sort of
Hmm.
fascinating. We're going to do our best to put some audio clips in here of people talking about what they saw. There was one guy specifically, he was getting interviewed by the BBC, and he said, "Hey, we were over by that other building, by this company, their property butts up to the fairground, and that company is the roof where the guy was shooting from. But over also adjacent to that is a tree line, and it was really hot yesterday." And this guy said, "Yeah, we kind of wandered back over by the trees to get some shade, and we saw this guy climbing up on the roof. So we are flagging down these police officers, and then all of a sudden the shooting started." Well, what came out today was that a police officer climbed up on the ladder that apparently the gunman brought.
Oh.
He climbed up on the ladder. The gunman turned around, pointed the rifle at him. The police officer retreated, and then the gunman was rushed and hurried and tried to shoot. And then obviously
Oh,
he was,
really?
yeah, that came out just recently.
I
So that
yeah, I hadn't heard that.
Right, we couldn't see him, but we could hear him. So we walked up, and probably 5 to 7 minutes of Trump speaking, I'm estimating here, I have no idea. We noticed a guy bear crawling up the roof of the building beside us, 50 feet away from us. So we're standing there, we're pointing at the guy crawling up the roof.
And he had a gun, right?
He had a rifle. We could clearly see him with a rifle. Absolutely. We're pointing at him. The police are down there running around on the ground. We're like, "Hey, man, there's a guy on the roof with a rifle." And the police are like, "Huh, what?" Like they didn't know what was going on. We're like, "Hey, right here on the roof. We can see him from right here. We see him. He's crawling." Next thing you know, I'm thinking to myself, why is Trump still speaking? Why have they not pulled him off the stage? I'm standing there pointing at him for 2 or 3 minutes. Secret Service is looking at us from the top of the barn. I'm pointing at that roof, just standing there like this. And next thing you know, 5 shots rang out.
So you're certain that the shots came from that guy on the roof?
100%. 100%.
And he was up there for a couple of minutes?
He was up
you
there.
You saw him up there for a couple of minutes?
Absolutely. At least 3 to 4 minutes.
And you were telling the police and the Secret Service?
We were telling the police. We were pointing at him for the Secret Service, who were looking at us from the top of the barn. They were looking at us the whole time when we were standing by that tree.
Could they see
binoculars?
Could they see him?
Probably not, because the roof, the way the slope went, he was behind where they could see.
The interesting part of this also is that there's video of the counter sniper team looking in that direction and not engaging, which is also kind of strange. There's so many things that are going to need to be investigated. One of the things that I texted you yesterday was that I really hope that this is sort of a wake-up call, and I wonder and I hope that this helps each side ratchet down the rhetoric and the temperature and the volume of, it hasn't helped that a lot of prominent people, like there was a staffer for a congressman who essentially tweeted something like, unfortunately, this guy didn't have enough training and missed his shot. And just like the mayor of Aberdeen, Washington tweeted something like, oh, ear injuries happen all the time. It's not a big deal. So there's a lot of really, really stupid takes, of course. And that's always going to happen. And a lot of people are going to lose their job or resign. Not only because they tweeted something out, but maybe in the Secret Service, because it just seemed like a pretty abysmal response that shouldn't have happened. That someone was, you're out in the middle of the field, there's one roof over here that you need to worry about, and it wasn't covered.
They just, I don't know if I've talked about it on the podcast. I've told you before, I believe, but at the Portland Yacht Club, we were able to cook for the president. Like my brother-in-law works there, and we were able to cook.
For Biden. Because Biden came in
here,
and so before the 2022 election, he came to the airport, he went down the street to the yacht club, and then back to the airport and left. I remember that.
Yeah. So he came and I was able to cook with my brother-in-law, and it was wild because, we had to do background checks. Everyone was very careful. There were snipers on the roof. There was a gunboat on the river ready to, go into action if needed. The lapse, like you're talking about, lapse of security, just looking at it, I mean, I have no military history. You don't either, but we have brains, and it just seems like this. It's just going to fuel a ton of conspiracy theories, I think, too, just because the places that the security was missed is just blatant, and there's enough security or conspiracy theories about JFK and the CIA back and who really assassinated him, and there's a dossier, I guess, in the White House that Trump was supposed to release. So, I mean, if something all the way back then is going to fuel conspiracy theory, if there's holes, something that happens today, like just what happened, there's going to be some interesting things, and I do hope that everything comes out clean and that there isn't any foul play.
Absolutely. That's one thing that people, please be cautious of news reports or things on Twitter, because again, things are flying left and right. The one interesting thing that I've seen is that this kid was in an advertisement for BlackRock, and people think BlackRock is like this huge. So BlackRock is a hedge fund, and they essentially own like a third of everything because they have all this money invested into all these different companies. And people think they're like this huge evil organization that is trying to put ESG on people and DEI and all these things people see as anti-American. It's just sort of like, oh, interesting. There's a connection between BlackRock and this kid. And also, okay, I'm going to put this audio in here too. I sent this to my friend. I didn't send it to you, but there was a guy 3 months ago who was doing some sort of Christian podcast like we're doing. And he predicted that he's like, I had a vision where I saw Trump standing up and a bullet went by his ear, and it went so close to his ear that his eardrum burst or something happened. And then the person got shot and killed, and then Trump was triumphant. That was 3 months ago that he posted that.
And then I saw an attempt on his life. This bullet flew by his ear, and it came so close to his head that it busted his eardrum.
Just some wild stuff happening, and we're going to do the idea that we had for today's show was going to be to share the gospel. We had an introductory episode. We had an episode on abusive pastors because that was in the news. We did American politics because that was right after 4th of July and the debate. We are going to do the gospel and just sort of ground ourselves in the biblical truth, but this was kind of just too important to ignore. So
Yeah.
we made the decision to do this today. It was on top of mind for not only us, but probably everyone else in the country. It's been a very interesting last 24 hours for people here in America. We need to hope and pray that, as catastrophic as it could have been, again, one man did lose his life. So we can't forget that. But I just hope that is it Romans 5 or 6 that talks about suffering produces perseverance, which produces hope? Okay, so it says, not only that, but we rejoice in our suffering, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. I think that that's one thing that we need to hope for, is that this very big moment in our country's history, that this is something that we can view with hope and say, whoa, we got really, really close and we don't ever want to touch that stove again. And
Yeah.
and that we really need to watch what we say, watch how we say it, how we treat each other, how we view people who have differences from us. Last week we talked briefly about abortion. I said that it's really hard for me to see eye to eye with someone who is perfectly okay with completely unfettered access to abortion up until 9 months. You have to understand that the people that say that, they see it as completely a woman's choice, that it's her body and whatever is happening inside her body is still her choice. Editor Kurt here. Sorry for that popping sound. We're not exactly sure what that is, although we're looking to upgrade our microphone system very soon. Andrew and I, and many Christians, most Christians, I would say, across the world, see that there are two lives. There is a mother's life and a child's life. And so you have to understand that, yes, you can have disagreements, but you have to understand and sort of put their shoes on and say, I understand that you think, one body, but really there are two bodies. And so we don't have to, even with something as literally life and death as abortion, I don't think you can't just throw bombs and hope to bring someone to your side. And we're here in Portland and we have Antifa stuff going on all the time. And I always think, do they think that they're winning people to their side by doing what they're doing? Who is attracted to this and just, yeah, that's what we need to do is just burn stuff and break windows. It alienates you. It doesn't win you friends. People are less likely to listen to you if you're incendiary, if you're vitriolic. That needs to be our hope, is that we see this moment as a holy crap. We need to get our stuff together and just not be as chaotic.
Right. I think, yeah, an awakening moment that we would snap out of the words that we were so carelessly flinging towards one another in different political realms, even different religious realms, or different, even in Christianity, about the different denominational grounds. I think in terms of Bible, I talked about it earlier, there's the love your enemies passage, there's the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, blessed are the peacemakers, for they would be children of God. Where they be so focused on promoting God's peace. But I was thinking, even Old Testament, I was thinking about Jonah and Nineveh. Jonah was called to go preach a message to people that were his mortal enemies, that had been persecuting him and the Jewish people for years and years. And he refused to go. And God called him to go declare that message and save people through that message. And Jonah refused. He didn't want those people to be saved. And to see a lot of Jonah's initial response to his enemies in the dialogue that we've had recently in America and elsewhere. And yeah, the hope is the gospel, that message that God has given us through his son Jesus to save, to redeem, to bring light where there's darkness, and to bring new life where there is sin and destruction. And that hope is still there. Thank God.
There's a parallel with that story with Jesus going through Samaria, because if you look at where Jesus was and where he was traveling to, he didn't need to go through Samaria. But Samaritans were the most disliked. It was like Hatfields and McCoys. It was like, we don't get along.
Right.
They hate our God and we hate them because of it. Jesus went through Samaria and taught, and that's where he met the woman at the well. If anyone in in your life is going to point the way to do something correctly, it's Jesus. And he reached out to people who thought the Jews were bad or wicked, and he reached out to people who had pious attitudes towards their doctrine. He reached out to Romans and Greek, and it didn't matter what anyone believed or thought. He went to everyone because his gospel is for everyone.
Right. And I mean, I'm just thinking big picture, talking about growth and how we grow. There's lots of examples in scripture of physical examples of running the race or other things. Like, you only talk to someone really interested in that, and someone who's trying to grow their strength, through their body, through working out and that kind of thing. You grow getting uncomfortable, pushing your limit. And growth in the Christian life, when we talk about praying for and loving our enemies or being peacemakers, it feels really good. The reason slander and talking behind someone's back and gossip, it feels really good. Like, it's sinful because it draws us in. There's something sinful about it that makes us want to do it. But there's a theologian named Rich Villodas. He says that praying for your enemies isn't something that's instantly enjoyable. But he says, quote, "Feeling good is not always the best way to determine whether I'm truly following Jesus," end quote. And I think that's important because feelings aren't the God that we listen to. It's something that we need to pay attention to, but our growth is often found in areas where we're not comfortable. And so I just encourage you, our listeners, and myself too, that praying for our enemies, loving those who are persecuting us, doesn't feel good, but it's something that Jesus calls us to.
I absolutely love what you said about growth. Back in 2018, again, I have this blog called Proverbs 31 Man, that just sort of musings that I had and thoughts and ideas. And I said the unique idea of personal relationship with Jesus, however, is contrasted by the idea that Christianity as a belief system can't be done alone. I asked myself how I can attract a Proverbs 31 woman without being that type of man myself. My answer was growth, and growth comes from relationship with others. Whether Christian friends or not, having genuine, vulnerable relationships is how we grow. We might call it community. It allows different people of different experiences, backgrounds, and viewpoints to do life as one body of Christ. By its very nature, it leaves plenty of toes to be stepped on, but by understanding others, empathizing, and relating to others via laughing and crying and praying, we grow. So I love that it's definitely still relatable and something that's needed. There's a lot more we can say. There's a lot more questions that are going to be answered here in the next several days and weeks. The next 4 months, again, I think we need to be hopeful. I also think people are going to exploit this for their own notoriety. We have to understand that everyone has a little, no matter how small, has a little part to play in this. What happens in this country is a product of everyone in the country. So we all have a little part to play in just toning things down and just saying, wow, we can't go there again. And we need to really look at ourselves in the mirror.
Right. And we talked about it previously, we have the most chance for change and speaking into things like this within our own little spheres. So it's easy to get caught up in the big, but focus on who's God placed around you, your family, your friends, anyone who's coming to your mind right now as I'm saying it, really, who's God placed around you to love, to care for, to speak into, and to listen to. That's where God wants us to work, and God wants us to love our neighbors, which are those that are nearby us. So that's where I would point is don't get stuck in the big stuff. Focus on the small stuff. Who's around you?
Yeah, your sphere of influence is really the only people, you go on Twitter, you're just, it's another voice in the void. And social media especially is the place where people can get really angry and you sort of hear the worst of people and from people. Yeah. It's really not a helpful place. And really the one place that we can find the absolute truth is in Jesus and in the Bible.
Amen. God bless you guys. Hope that we can come to you next week with a little bit more positive and hopeful tone, talking about the good news and what that means for our lives. So thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Dude-Eronomy, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks for listening to the Dude-Eronomy podcast. If you want a question answered or have a topic for an upcoming show, email us at deuteronomypod@gmail.com or find us on Instagram at dude_eronomy. And we'll see you next week.